You're listening to the Bear in Mind podcast, episode number 45.
A podcast uncovering identity, color, and love, where driving yourself crazy is totally sane and curable. Now your host, T. Bias.
I was in a room about, 7 or 8 years ago. I was in a room full of white people. So there was 6 of us, 5 other were white, and I am a person of color. I am Indian ethnicity. And because there were 6 people, you know how there's kind of these side conversations. It's not just one conversation as in group settings. And so there was another conversation happening off to the side, and there was another conversation on the other side of me. I was kind of in the middle, and I really didn't know which one to join in. I kind of always find myself kind of like which conversation to be a part of. And I've learned that you just need to pick one conversation and not try to go between. So I stayed in one, and it was between 2 males. And one was telling a story about how his father was selling his house. And then the person said, though, there was an interested buyer, and started to talk about his negative qualities. And then at the end, he's like, well, because he's black. And my eyes got so wide. And the person saw my facial expression and then tried to redirect the conversation and hush it up. And then I sat there frozen. And I am absolutely embarrassed to admit that I didn't even say anything. And what has kind of been in the back of my mind is this is not the first time that comments about my own ethnicity have been made in front of me, or about other ethnic groups, other races, comments that are based on stereotypes and reinforce a racist infrastructure mentality that is widespread. And so I kind of had always been wondering, how do you address those, especially in rooms where you can feel quite powerless because you are the odd person out. If you are the only person of color in a room full of white person and you address a racist comment, it is not taken very well. And I have even tried to do that. You get scolded upon for bringing up a racist issue if this is not the place, like if it's in a work setting or something like that. And I was watching an interview with 2 people who had experience in families with white supremacy. One of them had written a book, and they were on the Daily Show, and it's hosted by Trevor Noah. And I can't remember their names, but they were talking about how when a white person addresses racism in the room, how it shuts down any kind of talk or speak about talking about people in these kind of negatory, derogatory ways, and clumps them into a group and reinforces the way we think about race. And it's interesting that when a person of color, a black person, anybody else tries to address it that is not white, how it doesn't stop the conversation about racism. It just becomes this, well, you're being offended, or you took that the wrong way, or that person didn't mean that, or, that's what's been told to me anytime I've addressed behaviors in the past. And there are moments where I have been frozen, not knowing what to do, knowing that if I were to say something, that I in turn then would be scolded. So then the question becomes, what do you do when racism is the elephant in the room? And so I had been pondering this for a long time, because I recently saw this happen on a talk show. And I was watching it wasn't a really old talk show, but I was watching a rerun of a talk show. And it was a group of 5 people with the host, and they were talking. And then these are people who are famous. And one person referred to an ethnic group, the derogatory form for this ethnic group. And here it is on television. The host did not correct it. We were well into, the 21st century. This was not anything old. And I thought, would that be the worst case scenario? You are in a group of people, you are being televised, and I'm sitting on that couch, and I am the only person of color there. And the rest of the people around me are all white. And someone makes a comment about race, uses a stereotype, makes a derogatory comment, makes a racial slur. And in case this was actually a racial slur that was said on television, what do you do? And I got my answer of what to do. And I'm ready the next time this is going to happen. So I thought I'd share what I would do if I were sitting on television, even though I won't be on television. If I'm sitting on television, the host is white, the other 4 or 5 people next to me in the room are white, and there's a live audience, and it's going to be digitally available. What do you do when somebody makes a racist comment? And one of the things that I realized is whenever somebody does make a comment, says kind of a racial slur, and talks about stereotypes and kind of goes, oh, well, you know, that person's a Jap or a Paki. And what I realized is those terms dwindle down somebody's humanity. Now, this is nothing new. We know that it does, but it's not something you immediately, it comes to your mind, because a lot of times when I hear words and the way people of color are spoken about, my natural action is to have a flight or fight response. It's either to get really angry or to freeze, which is part of the flight or flight response, and get out of the situation as quickly as possible. And I realized that the way to address it is to bring back that person's humanity, whoever they're talking about, because oftentimes that's how it happens. Even though you are the person of color, you're the minority in this situation, in the room, they're referring to someone else. And it's almost like, oh, well, no, you're the exception. And we're not talking about you. That's also been, oh, we don't mean you, T. And I was like, well, okay, you just dwindled down somebody's humanity down to one phrase. And I'll talk about the example of being on this talk show, bring it back to that example. So on this show, the person was telling a story about how this man was helping him out and referred to a Japanese person as a Jap. And kind of the first thing that you need to be kind of aware of is that you actually have to listen to the person's story. And that can be very difficult if people are insinuating negative things about a race or ethnic group. And when this person was talking about this Japanese person, he was talking about making a purchase from this man and obtaining a gift to give to his friend. And what I realized in that moment, and it seems so counterintuitive, what I could do in that situation and what I could have done in the story that I told you about in the beginning when they were talking about the black person coming to buy a house, is that you simply ask a question. And it sounds totally not like something that would come to you. And in this situation, you would ask, oh, is that man who does this profession, is he a father? Is he passing on his craft? In this situation, they were talking about this Japanese man making something, this handmade gift. And ask a question about that. Is he passing on his craft to his children? How long has he been doing this craft? How long has he been mastering his craft? And what that does is it starts to bring about the humanness of that person. And I hadn't really realized that that is something in my power to do. Is they're talking about someone not in the room. And they're saying, oh, we're not talking about all ethnic groups. We're not talking about you, T. But what they are doing is they're not talking about somebody in that room who is there to defend their own humanity. And my power in it is to see that person that they're telling that story about, in this example, talking about a Japanese person as a Jap and dwindling down this man's humanity to a 3-letter word. as if that gives you the idea of what that story is, and it doesn't. And I realized that I can bring back the humanity, and I could give flavor to his story. I can add context to the story. I can maybe in some way, through my own awareness of the fact that there is a humanity behind someone's stereotype, racial slur, is create awareness for the whole group in the conversation about who are we actually talking about. We're not talking about only a Japanese person. We are talking about a father. We are talking about someone who has mastered a skill that rarely exists in this world, and that he's passing it down to his family, and he's creating this gift for this person to give to his friend. And that's the part of the story that gets missed when racial comments like these are made. And I saw my power come back to me as if I, as a person that's an involved bystander in this conversation, that's actually where my power lies, is to help enrich that story, bring back that person's humanity that is not in the room. I'm going to wrap it up here, and I'll check back with you next week.
Thanks for listening. Listen for a new episode next Tuesday by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Bye for now.